Finally? Yeah, I guess, finally. I gotta say, I've been surprised at how often and how many people have requested that I make a video about this watch. I think most of you who watch my videos are fairly deep into the unforgiving underworld of the watch collecting underbelly, so this makes sense. This Glashuette Original SeaQ isn't a mass market watch. Nothing from the brand really is, even if that's their goal, because you know, watchmakers are trying to sell as many watches as they can. But there are aspects of this watch that signal to me that Glashütte is trying to appeal to a different and smaller market than some of the bigger brands. But first, we should all thank my buddy Kirk for loaning me this watch. Kirk also made possible my video on the Gold Submariner and the latest Polar Explorer 2. I mention that because, well, you'll see why. This blue SeaQ came out in 2020 and the entire SeaQ line started only in 2019. The collection and its vintage-inspired looks draw on a watch produced in 1969, the Spezi-Matic RP TS200. It was a 36mm 200-meter dive watch with large, even numerals, a skin diver case, and an arrow minute hand. This modern diver has modern dimensions. This is 39.5mm across, 12.15mm thick, and 47mm long. It has 200 meters of water resistance, 20mm lug spacings, and weighs about 149 grams on the bracelet. These are great specs and dimensions for me and my 18cm wrist. That's just over 7 inches. 7 inches, tell your friends. There's another Glashuette Original SeaQ that this watch often gets compared to. It's the SeaQ Panorama Date. It's a very cool watch, but much bigger and more expensive. The Panorama Date is 43mm in diameter and 15.65mm thick. But it has a better movement with 100 hours of power reserve and a display back. And I also like that the date window feels like a pro-level trolling of date window haters. Suck it, nerds. I got to handle both of these watches together last year. While I can wear either on my wrist, I definitely prefer the size of the smaller. The large SeaQ has a more impressive movement, but the one in this watch is pretty good. Inside this is the in-house caliber 39-11 movement. It beats at 4 Hz and has a 40-hour power reserve. Unfortunately, the movement isn't visible through this case back, but the owner of the watch opened it up and took some photos because he's a madman and likes to live dangerously. In the description of this video is an article about the history and development of Glashütte movements. The article would make a terrific sleep aid for anyone not interested in watches. No prescription needed. Glashütte Original doesn't guarantee any timing specs for the SeaQ, but this specific watch is running just slightly better than -1 second per day, and that's across multiple positions. You're probably wondering how much this SeaQ costs. I've been avoiding the topic, but I guess the time has come. It's $10,200 on this bracelet. Don't shoot the messenger, I'm just doing my job. So why? Why $10,000? What justifies this costing about twice as much as an Omega Seamaster, or about the same as a Rolex Submariner? I'm going to ruin the suspense and tell you the truth. It costs this much because some people are willing to pay this much. The only reason a Seamaster is worth what it's worth, or the Submariner is worth whatever the hell it's worth this week, is because that's what people are willing to pay. There is no inherent value to any luxury watch. They're impractical, delicate, nearly functionless, and I love them. Give them to me, please, I need them. It's a fool's errand to look for any innate value in luxury goods, but lucky for you, I'm a fool. Let's compare this SeaQ to the world's most famous dive watch, the Louis Erard Alain Silberstein Regulator, record scratch sound effect. Okay, fine. Let's compare the SeaQ to the Rolex Submariner. This is the latest generation no-date sub. I think a Submariner with a date would be the best comparison, but I don't have that here, and you got to work with what you got to work with. So we'll just pretend that this watch has a date complication. The Submariner with a date costs $10,100 if you can get one from an authorized dealer. And again, the Glashütte Original SeaQ is $10,200 on a bracelet. 40.5mm across, 39.5mm across, 12.5mm thick, 12.15mm thick, 48mm long, 47mm long, 21mm lug spacing, 20mm. On dimensions, the SeaQ works better for me, but the differences aren't very pronounced, and anyway, dimensions have the least to do with value or price. The Submariner has 300 meters of water resistance to the SeaQ's 200 meters. If you think you need that extra 100 meters, you are wrong. I said good day, sir. Both watches have powerful blue lume, a slight difference in color, but they look equally bright to me. Both watches have ceramic bezel inserts. The Sub has a 120-click bezel and the SeaQ has a 60-click bezel. Both are executed extremely well with no backplay, but they have very different feels and sounds. The 3230 and 3235 Rolex movements are absolutely superior to the Glashütte 3911 movement, on magnetic resistance and on power reserve especially, 70 hours versus 40 hours. And while both of these watches are running almost perfectly, Glashuette Original makes no promises like Rolex makes with its -2 to +2 seconds per day. The bracelets are very different and yet they share some similarities. Obviously the visual difference is stark. The classic fully brushed oyster bracelet versus a kind of oyster-inspired bracelet with polished center links. The Sub bracelet tapers from 21mm to 16mm and uses standard screws for adjusting. The SeaQ tapers from 20mm to 19mm and uses a frustrating link release system that I can't even get into. You probably only do this once as an owner, but it's no bueno. Screws, please everyone, stop trying to be clever. The Submariner has a handy adjustment system called the Glide Lock. Take the watch off, pull the bracelet away from the clasp, slide it to the right length, and push it back in to lock it in place. Not bad. The SeaQ on the other wrist has the best adjustment system I've ever tried. It's actually the same system that's on the IWC Mark 18 that I used to own. My guess is these systems are made by the same company. Without even taking the watch off your wrist, press the logo on the clasp. With the button pressed, you can slide the bracelet toward or away from the clasp and release the button to lock in the new length. What IWC and Glashuette Original have going here is truly the best. Not Rolex or Vacheron or Tudor or Omega, none of these brands have something this good. And yeah, it's a little thing overall, but it's a big little thing that I think many people overlook. Putting a watch on your wrist at a store doesn't tell you how it's going to wear for a full day. Trust me, you want an adjustment system. Then we get to the finishing between these two watches. Rolex doesn't really focus on finishing, at least not in its professional watches. They definitely put a lot of care into quality control. You rarely see imperfections in their watches. But Rolex sport watches don't emphasize beveling and angles and contrast. That's just not how they do. The SeaQ though, this is luxury finishing. There's a nice bevel running along the case flanks. The case sides have a cool vertical brushing. The top of the lugs have a circular finish, something Rolex used to do. And the whole look is wildly different between these two watches. Austere and modern versus vintage-inspired elegance. The dials and crystals are other examples. The Sub has a glossy black dial under a flat sapphire crystal, simple markers and signature, if obvious, hands. The SeaQ has a domed sapphire crystal above a stunning sunburst blue dial that's adorned with applied, lume-filled numerals, and a matching color date wheel. I'm not crazy about the arrow minute hand, but it's authentic to the original Spezi-matic design. But come on, would someone really be cross-shopping these watches? No, I don't see someone trying to decide between a SeaQ and a Submariner. More likely is one of these two scenarios. One, someone has already owned all the big names like Rolex and Omega and they're ready to try something different. Or two, they currently own a Submariner or two, and a Seamaster or two, and they want to diversify. That's why I think this makes so much sense in the collection of Kirk, who owns this watch. If, like Kirk, you own or have owned plenty of Swiss heavyweight watches, the SeaQ makes a lot of sense. At a certain point, the design, and especially the ubiquity of those other dive watches, can make them feel a little boring. I adore the Rolex Submariner, and I've been lucky enough to have a few, and this SeaQ is more interesting to me in several ways. Not always, but several ways. The look primarily, and the bracelet and clasp, and I also kind of like the convoluted history of this underdog brand. Does all that make this watch worth $10,200? Does it make sense for it to be positioned alongside the most famous and sought-after dive watch in the world? No, not that. That. Maybe it does. Glashütte Original knows the sales numbers, I certainly don't, but what I do know is that many of you have contacted me with the hope that I'd review this watch. So that tells me that yes, there's a market for this watch, and that the list price hasn't scared people off, and maybe even it's attracted some people. The Glashuette Original SeaQ is a beautiful watch, and I use that word beautiful with a lot of intention. There aren't many divers at or below this price that look this good, to me. Whether it's to your liking visually, mechanically, and financially, that's between you and your god/bank account. Either way, I'm glad the SeaQ is out there, making people inspired, interested, and even a little confused.